Hello, everybody. Sorry, I just wanted to open this up so we could move that conversation into this room. Just give a couple minutes for Phoebe to join us.
I'm the designated face of policy today. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm worn like a tie and a suit.
No, we need to make sure that policy is accessible. That's
Policy is fun,
I don't know about fun, but
necessary.
necessary,
Um,
yes.
I,
Yeah.
I think policy is sort of like exercise. It's not that fun when you're doing it, but it feels so good afterwards.
That is a very good analogy.
Yeah.
It's arduous sometimes, and
It's long haul.
I feel like I'm
Um,
doing it wrong most of the time, or you gotta
yeah. I
get
feel
your
like
back.
Ben presented that EPR like it's going to take such a long time. But when you look back at like successful legislation, successful things that we take for granted now and how long they took to implement. I was just looking into this for the repairability index, and nutrition labeling started out as a voluntary measure in 1970, didn't become a mandatory law until 1990. And even still, it didn't become the clarity that it has now until 2014.
It just makes me think of the fact that vegetables don't really exist. It's a marketing
But
technique. Sorry, that's,
yeah, and it clearly hasn't solved the obesity epidemic. So, but
there's,
baby steps.
but that actually,
Um,
I am not trying to dominate the
yeah,
conversation, but
sorry.
that does make me think because I have thinking about EPR, the complexity. I wonder because of the world ecosystems that we have, how that adds the layers of complexity. And yeah, I don't expect you to know, but I did not. Don't thank me for the textile APR build yet because they haven't done anything yet. So let's get the then we can celebrate. But um, yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. But I'll let if you folks. I changed the settings so that if
Yeah.
folks would like to unmute, they could do that. We have a smaller group. I think this was gonna break down to pretty small. And I know that there were lingering questions from the last session that I don't really know how to get the chat over from. So if you are joining and you had those questions, feel free to jump in. Adrian specifically, because he had a question and I don't know if we got fully
Yeah.
answered.
He had a couple of questions. One of which I can answer, which is that they have not yet collect the reuse impact fund has not they're only in year one and they haven't yet collected or analyzed the data. They are collecting data. They have not yet analyzed that data, but we're all eagerly awaiting it, as I'm sure you are as well. But please feel free to unmute and ask your other question as well if you would like.
Yeah, so thanks to efforts on some of the people in this room here, we've managed to pass right to repair laws in Washington State, which is great. But unless people bring their broken devices to independent repair shops, we won't actually see any impact. So I'm trying to think of what is it that we can do to help develop. For me, it's a market, specifically the independent repair businesses, as well as connecting with consumers. It takes an additional effort to find a repair business. It's not as convenient as just ordering stuff on Amazon, even though I have seen businesses that have started up where they want to make it as a convenient to repair stuff. But just what are the policy initiatives, programs, things, efforts that could really boost repair?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think so much of policy is the communication strategy around policies, right? How do we get the word out about what is and isn't, or what what is possible. I know there are efforts to on, to get enforcement. It's like you pass the policy, then there's what does it actually look like to implement the policy, and then there's how do you actually enforce the policy. And a lot of things get passed without enforcement, and then it's not a very effective, all right, policy. So yeah, I think that's a great point. If anybody else wants to chime in with a response to that, I think that's a struggle.
That's the golden question, right? Like that's the $1 million question. Not really.
Yeah.
It's, the conversation usually goes to access, um, and awareness. Yeah, as was mentioned in the chat. But you're right, it's cultural shift too. It's not a satisfying, but things like swaps, you know, I use swaps specifically as a great example because there's a culture that I grew up with where, my mom loved to shop. She would say that was a hobby. And there's dopamine releases happening when you're participating in something that you're familiar with and you're able to replicate that in some of these environments. We've talked about that in repair events where you're creating a cohesiveness. And Tom's trick question, if you were in the toolkit thing about if repair cafes were about repairing items or about, community building, like, okay, buddy, yeah, it's about, okay. But there's the idea of the replication of those. I think Ben, yeah, I'm not calling you out at all for saying in the last session about the questions of scale and how that becomes a challenge. But I'll harken back to conversations, if it was with you, Adrian, or was with Andy, but I, answered a scale question with lots of replication is scale. Having the infrastructure and the plug-in play versions of things, but also making them resonant to the communities. So there was another question. We can go.
Yeah, Linda,
Who,
please
yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, I threw my back out, so camera is not an option. I'm propped up really weird. Um, so my comment was awareness and access, and I seem to be one of the people that keep bringing up language and culture of like that's what I was getting at for who will be your early and then your primary adopters. I mean, when I was growing up, my dad fixed everything, but he also grew up during the Second World War. Um, and so having anything at all, like, you always reused everything. And so if you had a place that was accessible to, I mean, that's why like who would your early adopters probably be people like ourselves who are mobile, who speak English, who can find these places and get to them easily. But I mean, who do you want to be your primary users? Because then that's the question of like, how do you scale, right? And just publicizing it as King County is wont to do in a sheet of paper that goes out with your bill that most of us don't even get because we live in apartments or other types of housing. Partnering with organizations, I think, um, like service organizations that do case management with particular cultures with language capability. I don't know. I'm just throwing
Yeah,
things out there.
I think it's a great point.
We,
Partnering with, collaborating to amplify the awareness about things is huge. You have to find the trusted messenger in each, in your target audience, right? Who are they going to be listening to? There's so much noise these days that figuring out who you can partner with to really get that message out to the people who can benefit the most. And that's probably different depending on where you are, right? So that those early adopters are going to vary depending on what part of the country and what your local ecosystem looks like. I think it's a great point, though.
even green, like in other languages, we think green, or in English, and we call things green, green living, green, green, green. That does not translate. Simple things like that don't translate to what other cultures. And a lot of the time, we end up in these summits discussing, at least fractionally, about where is everyone? And a lot of the cultural differences that we find in our communities aren't, because they're already doing a lot of this work in ways that we don't understand. And yeah, there's a ton of question of access. But I think one of the really important things you were getting at, Phoebe, is that organizations, if you're focusing on reuse and repair approaches, they need the partnership and shouldn't, in a lot of cases, try to be that convener, because you're not going to do it as well as other people in other places can.
Understanding what each person can bring to the table, I think, is important. I want to circle back to this question in the chat about prop space and understanding you know what government entities have space, and might be able to be used for reuse, and what that process is going to be different depending on what the government agency is. I know San Francisco did a great study about how to repurpose Caltrans, is our transportation authority. So they have a huge amount of unused space left over under freeway overpasses and kind of underutilized space, and they did a whole study about how to turn that into a reuse hub. I think again it depends what your particular whether you're looking at city space or county space or state owned space, but I think often that is a thing that the government entities don't have the bandwidth to, they don't have the people to activate those spaces, right? But that's what a nonprofit can bring, or a volunteer organization can bring to the table. Yeah. Real, do you have a question? Go ahead.
We cannot hear you.
No, we can't hear you.
Not yet.
Well, you can put it in the chat if you can't get that to work, maybe. I'm sorry, that's a no, more cumbersome.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out if I can do it on the back end too, but feel free to message us or put it in the chat if you can, Real. Okay, I'll work on that.
Yeah. I do think, Steve, did that answer your question, or does anybody else want to chime in on how best to
That was useful. I wonder if there's any universalities, and I think there just may not be.
Yeah. I mean, I think it also depends on the use that you're looking for, right? I think one thing we find is easy is to pop up in a space, right? Like community centers, libraries are always, there's lots of great resources for that. But of course, that is really onerous to the nonprofit to have to be moving around constantly. So getting permanent spaces. But there are a lot of examples of, $1 a year leases and things like that have happened in order to facilitate that. So yeah, somebody just brought up
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
That's
I
okay.
I hate technology. Oh no, Jesus Christ. Sorry. Um, I was trying my hardest to figure out how to raise my hand, and then my mic wasn't working. So I was actually wanting to add to the previous point, which was the different cultures. For context, I live in a really small community up north in Canada. I live in the Yukon. There's 20,000 people in my community. So we're really, and everyone's like spread apart, right? We're pretty small. And I want to add on to the different cultures, because we've seen a surge of immigrants moving into the north, and we welcome it. It's wonderful. We've had a lot of people move here, and it's been great. It's been great for like just learning new cultures and like improving our infrastructure and stuff like that. But the main struggle that we've encountered was a lot of people who are moving, especially from like Asian countries, have completely different policies with everything. So like recycling for them, it wasn't like a normal thing. Like it was waste, or it's like biodegradable or non-biodegradable for like some countries. So what our government did was we established a Welcome to the Yukon event that started 7 years ago. So whenever someone's like new to the territory and or like moved from like a different country, a completely different community, we have like this big event out in the community, and we show them what happens in the community. So this is how we recycle, this is how we do this. And it's a multicultural event too. So like the cultures that move here, the Koreans, the Filipinos, the the Indians, the different people that move here are can it's a 2 day event. They share their culture in exchange too on the second day. So that's been like a policy like we've established where first we introduce our culture here in the Yukon, how we do it, how stuff is done. And then the second day they share their food, they share their culture, and it's just been like it's been really effective. I'm actually going to the annual event again this Saturday, so which is why I wanted to mention it. But like yeah, we've been having it it's hosted by a nonprofit organization here in the Yukon Family Literacy Coalition, and they're the ones like spearheading this effort. And I thought it would be like great for other people too, just because I know like for us um we have a really mobile population because people will live a year here and they'll realize the Yukon is not for them because we have minus 40 degrees Celsius, minus 50 degrees Celsius during the winter. So people are like, I'll try it for a year, and actually it's not for me. So
Sounding pretty
um
good right now. We're having a heat wave in March, so. But
it's minus 30 here right now. Thank you so much for making me
oh,
jealous, you know.
it's terrible everywhere. It's terrible everywhere. Nowhere it's safe.
But
Yeah,
yeah, but
that's a
yeah.
great. I love that. I think, I mean, it's really true, right? That in person is still the best way to communicate things. I mean, how many of you find that uh, tabling or events or one-on-one outreach is the best way, is still the best, if totally time-consuming way to communicate about policy changes and or opportunities in your local town, because we certainly find that way. We get the most volunteer signups when we go tabling at events, and um, it's very it is very time consuming, but it's also very effective. So the education hour to education ratio, that should be an impact.
Return on investment of your
ROI.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I was just gonna say that, the conversation in the chat too, co-location, hosting, collaboration in that way, whether it's repair businesses or like senior living communities or I think a lot of mutual aid efforts that's begun to get a lot more traction in the area. I think it's still also just that time monicum of how we marry these things. And then to come back to the theme of this session is parlaying that into policy that translates into everyone being able to not just rely on a an impossible factor of time capital for people that do not have that. I think that's a huge piece of the disparity, to say the least. The people that have the ability to spend 4 hours at a repair cafe or have the ability to travel to wherever, but time is very much, pieces of that. I think policy's role is, bringing it into all of these institutions, all of these places. So I don't know how to do that. Magic wands.
No. It's true though. I think a lot of times, policy, I like the idea of, policy as indicating what we value as a community, and that's that can be done. And I think, one of the most effective things or things that I love here is the awards programs that our local waste agency, recognizes businesses that are going above and beyond and performing reuse, and that's a really easy thing to do, but it highlights what we value as a community is, businesses that have zero waste practices, that have inclusive, reuse policies, things like that. And I think that, like you're saying, that can be a great way to highlight, what's going well. It's very hard to run a conversation and follow the chat. So
No, I'm trying to read the chat
Be
for
tag
you,
teaming.
and then
Okay,
I'm
all right.
like trying to not respond. So
Yeah.
Ben had a good question
Um,
about, prioritizing. I think and to
Yeah.
not just answer maybe your question, but also like this comes with grants as well when you're looking at
Yeah.
competitive grants between institutions and places that are doing good work but competing with each other to do this. So question about 2 building spaces available, interest from 12 different reuse organizations. What's a good way for the county to select those?
Yeah.
And
I mean, right. How do you come
do
up
they
with
all need the
criteria?
entire space?
and the
Is that
whole
what-
time, I mean, there's all kinds of factors. Yeah, there's a lot of variables, but public vote, I don't know.
I mean, I think I think it's interesting to think about the impact calculator as a tool for figuring that out, right? Not to be like, how do you really say like the demonstrable impact, or the broadest impact across the most criteria, or the most alignment with the priorities of the county or the organization, right? It's like coming up with the criteria that allow you to make those decisions. Um, or you cut the baby in half. I can't remember that analogy, but so
Biblical
I
context
think the
there.
point was not to do that. Trying to
don't do
avoid
that. Right. Come up with criteria. I mean, I also think, I guess one thing that I will say is a real struggle is, longevity of these reuse organizations. I don't know how to assess this in an RFP process, but understanding, which organizations are robust enough to continue and are not just the passion project of one person who, when that person burns out, as they inevitably will, then the organization goes away. So I think, if you think about ESG criteria in investing, right? It's like environmental impact, social impact, and governance is the third one. And I think that often gets overlooked when we're talking about reuse organizations. How do you develop criteria for which ones have a governance model that's going to allow them to continue and to be successful in the future?
There's a question. Well, there's a few questions that were before this too about, viability of repair in businesses and proximity and replacing and buying new. And I had a thought, and it might have gone away already, but something about,
It might be almost happy hour.
well, when you're talking about like the reuse impact calculator and
Yeah.
letting data sort of drive some of those conversations, if we only focus on things like tonnage, right, which is the only thing we have right now, then we're only going to be focusing on policies that affect the grossest amount of tonnage. Grossest,
Yeah.
that's probably not the right use of the word, but you know what I mean.
Relevant
And
though.
So that's sort of, it's feeding itself in that way.
Yeah. I think that's really true. I think that reuse is still borrowing from the waste and the recycling industry in a lot of the impacts that we are measuring. And I think this all the time, that like the advertising that we do for the repair fairs is promoting the concept of repair. There's no way for us to measure how many people are just thinking about repair because they've seen that advertising. They're not even coming to the event, but it still is seeding this idea And I think a lot of reuse organizations are like that. They're doing a lot of education and advocacy and awareness raising and not capture. There's no way to capture that. But, that's really what we need to be doing is getting people to think about reuse before they buy the thing in the first place or before they throw it away because it's broken, right? So that figuring out how we can measure that impact is really going to potentially, could drive policy in the future because that the behavior change piece of it is hugely important.
And to kind of go on, maybe a little off of that, but kind of back to where Linda was speaking about that earlier. I think one thing that I don't see yet somehow is the collaboration, except maybe in some unique ways like Cami actually, with co like you know cohesively promoting these initiatives through policy, through public sector avenues, because our school district has a huge flexibility to translate into different languages, but you have to pay, I don't know, $500 a month to be part of the Peach Jar, messaging system because that is what they use in house. So yeah, the policy equals metrics, and it should drive the change in order for that to also feed into itself. It's like that, compounding
I
interest.
Yeah, I thought that some of the metrics that I can't remember
Haley?
the name from fixing from the London fixing factories. He shared some really great metrics around social capital and loneliness, community connection, community engagement and connection, and I'm really curious to know how they are tracking that. You have to be doing good surveying to get at those metrics. But I have another question for this group. We only have a couple minutes left, but one thing we didn't really touch on, which I think is a hugely underdeveloped policy area for reuse, is workforce development, economic and workforce development and job training policies and programs. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in with some examples of that, but I think here in California, we're really struggling because there's climate core, but it's very narrowly focused, and they're not defining reuse as a potential job track as a green job, right? I don't know if anybody. No. Okay, I'm just going to lob that then. Oh yeah, so
You're muted again.
I could say something about what we're doing. It connects to deconstruction, so reuse of building materials. So we work with some good local partners to provide jobs for, mostly men coming out of incarceration, and so then they can just transition into deconstruction work. It's a valuable job, build skills, and they can either stay there or they can move on to something else. So I think it's kind of partnering to accomplish more than one thing at the same time.
Yeah.
And they have really, speaking of metrics, they have really good stats about why that's a better path than the path of recidivism. And
yeah,
I think the risk.
Is that a county policy? Oh, sorry, or program, or do you partner with a nonprofit? Do you partner with a nonprofit, or is that a county-run program?
We do. We contract with them for deconstruction work.
Oh, got it. Okay, sorry. Who did I just interrupt?
Oh, I was just gonna talk again. We are gonna have to leave in just 2 minutes.
Yes.
But I think I just don't want to decry. Like, I want all of the efforts, but I think you run the risk when we're looking at a developing sector, right? In investing in putting people that are most vulnerable into those sectors and giving them job training. I would love for a sector to boom in deconstruction, but I feel sometimes like there's a horse and cart situation where we're trying to, we talk about this in grant schemes and spaces all the time of, making the case for programs and situations. So I worry about workforce development being emphasized when we aren't getting the same support and infrastructure on the back end. And so that's why policy is so important, to be able to be the foundation of that, right? So if we can create that something that is far less predatory than our systems. Anyway, that's, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. It needs to be, you need policy and funding to support those programs so that they can be a venue for job training and workforce development. And Minnesota obviously does a lot to support the deconstruction industry. So that's, but not everywhere is like that. It is 3:45, so we need to go, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna run and open the other tool library.
Okay.
Real quick, but I'll be
Heather,
back.
did you have a comment?
I was just going to say one thing. Unfortunately, I had to miss, I had to conflict for the last hour, but does it mainly come down to we need money?
Yes.
That's the main
Always.
policy thing we need. Okay.
Always.
Money and
That's what
space.
That's what
Which are the
money,
same.
but money is space also.
Money is space. Money is
Okay.
money is capacity. Yep.
Yeah.
Money.
All right. That's what I was wondering. Like, what was the number one thing? And so it sounds
I
like there's
really hope we see some stuff come out of EPR. I'm not sure like what France has done eventually, so that money is going to fund voucher programs, et cetera. So there's like long-term sustained funding.
right.
Yeah.
Money.
Yeah, money.
Okay, good. Excellent.
Money.
Thank you.
I like calling it resources a little bit more sometimes, as we're like, tipping on the iceberg of reevaluating.
True. But as a
But-
lobbyist, I want to just get right to the hardcore point.
I can't
Anyway, sorry to have had to miss all that.
tools.
But anyway,
No.
thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I have to switch sessions.
Yeah,
but
you've got to
you
lead
all are
another
the next.
session, so
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. So I'm leaving.
Bye.